Welcome back to Poplar Preparedness. We're going to be talking today about inflation. We're not going to be talking about is there inflation. We all know there is inflation. We're not just going to be talking about how much that inflation is. No. We're going to be talking about what you should do about the inflation. Now, I lived overseas when I was doing humanitarian work and disaster relief. I worked in some areas and there was very high inflation there. They had a serious problem in winters of getting cut off because it was up in the mountains. And also, the inflation rate in their nation was actually usually 10 to 15%, sometimes a little higher. And the people there learned how to deal with that inflation. And I'm going to share some of the things that they've done and some of the things that I suggest that you should do in order to protect yourself and your family and your finances from inflation. So the first thing that they did up in those mountains is that they hoarded stuff. You know, I know hoarding is a bad word nowadays, and our ancestors would never have used the word hoard. They would have said stockpile, or they would have said being prepared, right? You go back 100 years in the United States, and everybody had a pantry that would get them through winter. That you'd be insane if you didn't. You need to get your family all the way until next harvest season. Like, if you don't do that, who's going to take care of you? Like, that's how things work. You take care of yourself. So you need to make sure you have what you need. So, but what they took things to a different level, where instead of having like big supermarkets, they'd have like these little family-owned business, like grocery stores, sort of. And each family, and I'm not talking about like 5 people, I'm talking about like their big family, like the 40, 50 families bound together by, you know, generational history and such. They'd have like community like stores basically. And then you get into the main town and stuff like that, and you have like 20 or 30 of these identical stores that all have the same stuff. And it's all the same price, too. It's all laid out the same way. And you're just kind of like, well, why do we have 20 or 30 stores that all have the exact same thing? Well, that doesn't make much sense. You know, we should have like 3 stores that have different things, right? And then like lots of other stores that have more specialized things. But that's not how it worked. And in fact, on a number of occasions, I went into one of those stores and I needed to stock up. I saw something that I really wanted that was maybe unusual or wherever, and I was like, I want those. And they'd ask me how many I wanted, and I was like, I want them all. And they'd be like, I don't know if we're allowed to do that. You know, it's kind of one of those things. It's like, let me go ask if we can do that. And to us as Americans, it's like if you went to the store and you want to buy all of the cream of chicken soup or something like that, they'd be like, well, okay, just take it. There, it's like there's a counter and you had to ask for it and they had to hand it to you, right? And they don't want to hand it all to you. And the reason for that is because they had to get the replacements in by truck. They didn't want to run out. And more than that, they didn't like selling too much because then they would have a fistful of cash that's losing value instead of stock on the shelf. Think about that. The stores did not want to sell because they wanted to have stock on the shelf that didn't lose value rather than paper that was losing value. Are you starting to follow that? When we talk about prepper pantries, as we talk about stocking up on food and non-perishable things, it's important. Why? Well, if the grid goes down, if SHTF happens, yes. But what happens if inflation picks up? What happens if inflation stays the same, actually? In that case, you're going to wish that you had bought those things. I talked just the other day about going to the Dollar Tree and stocking up because they're going to jack their prices up 25% the next couple weeks. They promised to have it up by January 1st. If the prices are going to go up 25%, the question should be, in the next 3 or 4, 5 months, 6 months, what am I going to buy from the Dollar Tree? And maybe I should go buy that now when it's cheaper. Okay? If you can get a 25% increase on an investment in 6 months, that's like a 50% annualized return on investment. That's pretty good. You'd almost make out better by taking a credit card, charging the credit card. If you're paying 25% interest on the credit card, think about that, and you're getting 50% over annualized, you'd actually be better charging on your credit card and just letting it sit on your credit card. Now, I'm not recommending doing that, okay? That negates a lot of the value of what you're doing, but I'm just saying that's how the inflation math works. If people are willing to loan you money at really low interest rates and inflation's a lot higher, you can actually be better off doing that. So if you have some money laying around that's losing value every day, maybe you should invest it in stuff. That's what they did. The next thing that they did was, of course, they would keep very little cash. They would take their cash and they would invest it in land. They would invest it in other people's businesses. So that's, to put that in modern, you buying a house, you buying land, right? A lot of people are doing that right now, which is smart. Investing in other people's businesses. Now, you have the problem with the stock market is incredibly overvalued. 90% of the assets held by S&P companies is intangible. Right now, 90% of the assets on the books of the companies in the S&P 500, 90% of that is intangible, which is like goodwill and stuff like that, which is not really anything at all. Sometimes it's, patents, and that's actually kind of something. But when you're talking about like the value of your name as a company, that's not really an asset. And the fact that valuations are already strained at price that you're paying per share base compared to the assets that are on the books, I think we're at like you're paying $5 for every dollar worth of assets in the companies on average. And then when I tell you that 90% of those assets that you're buying are actually not really there, that's stock market's really overvalued, like ridiculously overvalued. So I would suggest being careful about that. Being careful about your investments in the stock market. Don't hedge with bonds because bonds do not do well in high inflation environments. As inflation goes up, interest rates go up, which means the value of bonds goes down. So if you have a whole bunch of money in bonds, you could lose a lot of money by having in bonds. And people say, well, you should hedge your position in stocks by buying bonds, and yet they've artificially lowered the interest rates on bonds to a ridiculous level, which conversely is actually elevating the price of bonds to a ridiculous level. So all that to say, you should be really careful about what you're doing with your investments. But if you have opportunity to invest directly in a business that's going to actually bring in money, then that's a good thing to invest in. Also, if you have a business that you want to invest in, starting up and doing that kind of thing, that might be a really good place to sink some money. Assets, hard assets, buying vehicles that are going to last, not like vanity vehicles. Those are not quite so good because they lose a lot of value. But when you start talking about industrial machinery, older vehicles that are still running, that are able to be fixed up, that kind of stuff, that's stuff that's worth investing in. any kind of productive assets are the holy grail of things that you should invest in, right? If you can invest in an asset that's going to provide you with income, that's important. Because most jobs are not going to increase their wages as fast as inflation goes up. That's something that's experienced worldwide in high inflation areas, is that the wages don't keep up with the inflation rate. And so what do you have to do? You either have to work more hours, you have to pick up a second job, or you need to have some other way of making money in order to make ends meet, or else you're just going to be spending down your reserves. And if you have reserves of cash, those are going to be losing their value faster and faster. The best thing you can do is to stock up on stuff. That's the best way to hedge that. If you want to talk about investment strategies, buying pieces of undervalued companies is also a good way to do it, or buying commodities. But when you do those things, you need to be very careful that you're actually buying something and not just buying a promise of something from a company or a business or a bank that could go under at any time or default on their promise. And you need to be very clear on what that promise is. Because a lot of times you're getting promised that you're going to get this stuff, but really when you dig down to the contract, they always have the option of paying you cash instead of giving you the stuff. Sometimes they have stuff that you put money into the fund and they have stuff allocated to you, but the problem is they have that stuff allocated to 5 or 6 or 10 other people as well as you. So when you all show up at the bank at once and say, I want my silver, my gold, my bushels of wheat or whatever else, you find that stuff doesn't actually exist. It was just on paper. You were buying a promise from a salesperson. So be very careful about what you're buying if you go that direction, and be very clear what the contract says and all the outs that they have, because if the price of those assets goes through the roof, they may not be able to purchase those assets to give to you, and they may not want to purchase those assets to give to you. So there's ETFs and such like that you need to be careful about. All that to say that there are some interesting investment opportunities out there. A lot of you probably are going to be screaming at me talk about crypto, and I still don't have a strong opinion on crypto, except it could go to the moon. It could be the next big thing, or the Federal Reserve and other central banks could step on it and all the countries could just ban it, and you would be left with nothing. So it's something that could keep going up and become very, very important, or it could go to zero, basically, because all it is ones and zeros. The whole system collapses. What happens if one person hacks the system? You say, well, it's unhackable. It's like, well, have you heard of quantum computers? Because quantum computers can hack those things. Not right now, because the quantum computers are still struggling to get on their feet. But when you have somebody who gets enough computational power in a quantum computer, they will be able to cut right through the algorithms that secure the blockchains. So that's something to also be thinking about. And that's not too far out in the future, because once that happens, are they going to be able to be secured? I don't know. So that's why I don't really have an opinion on crypto. You need to be prepared to lose all of the money that you have in crypto, because all it takes is just one regulation, one central bank to go after it, like for real, and you could be left holding the bag. Or one hack, not of like wallets or like Coinbase or something like. I'm talking about the actual blockchain. If somebody attacks the blockchain, I know it's very difficult to do, but when you're talking about tens of billions of dollars and more worth of incentive to do it, someone might do it. And if they do it, it would bring the whole system down possibly. So as soon as faith is lost in a cryptocurrency, it becomes worth zero. So all that to say, I don't know if that's the best way. Silver and gold, they've been around for thousands of years. It is what it is, and you're going to have what you have. They aren't going to go to zero, but they are manipulated and pushed down by central banks in value. So those are some thoughts. Invest in hard assets. As we move into a high inflation situation, goods become more valuable, labor becomes less valuable. And we've been in a high labor value and low goods value environment for a very long time. And as we switch over, it's going to be a shock to a lot of people, because people are so used to saying, when they're talking about their finances, they talk about what do they do for a living? What labor do they have? Because that's what's of value. But in the future, as we talk about higher inflation levels, it actually is going to change to what do you own? What do you have? What assets do you have? Because that's what's of value much more than what you do. Your time is basically becomes valueless because you exchange it for worthless paper. So there's some thoughts. If you have some additional thoughts about inflation, pop those in the comments down below. I appreciate you guys watching. Please hit the like button. I appreciate your time. And God bless. Steve Poplar, out.